one side to the other. It's all just pantomime, isn't it, really?
It is. It's schoolboy theatre. There was insults flying back and forward. Sir Keir Starmer even swore. I don't know if you guys were watching the live feed, but Starmer swore at Sunak at one point. We'll bring you that clip later. Bleeps out, of course.
Is that acceptable?
Quite unparliamentary, perhaps. But Rishi Sunak did call Starmer a human weather vane because he flip-flops on policies here, there and everywhere.
Goes with the wind.
Yes.
Moves with the wind. But, you know, Keir Starmer did talk about a couple of serious matters, particularly childcare. The government did have this big policy to expand childcare, give parents lots of free hours and all of this, and it does seem to have been an absolute shambles. But, of course, Rishi Sunak wanted to remind the public of Keir Starmer's record as a human rights lawyer. Yeah,
he didn't actually respond to that question, did he, about childcare, Rishi Sunak? No. So, I mean, you do get the feeling it was a chance for Starmer each week, actually, not just today, but each week to lay out your plan for the country. But it just seems to be a back and forth of insults and schoolboy taunting, which is a shame, really. Well,
there you go. I'm sure a lot of people are a bit fed up with that. But let us know, gbviews at gbnews.com. Did either of them land a punch? But first, it's your headlines.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. 2 minutes past one, these are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of being bullied by his own MPs as today's Prime Minister's questions were dominated by allegations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke warned of an electoral massacre for the government, writing in the Daily Telegraph that the Tories need a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticisms, accusing Labour of not understanding Britain's values. But Sir Keir Starmer seized on the editorial, saying that Tory infighting had descended into a long-running soap opera.
We've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizb ut-Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Donald Trump swept to victory in the New Hampshire primary overnight, demonstrating his tight grip over the Republican Party's hard right. The former president took 55% of the vote, beating his last remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, while President Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. Ms. Haley, who's a former ambassador to the United Nations, is vowing to fight on, promising to stay in the race until Super Tuesday on the 5th of March, when 15 states and 1 territory hold their votes. The union representing Royal Mail workers say it will draw up on its own report on the future of the Postal Service. That's in response to changes suggested by the regulator Ofcom, which includes the option of scrapping mail deliveries on Saturdays. Other options include slowing down deliveries, with most letters taking 3 or more days to arrive. Communication Workers Union General Secretary Dave Ward says Ofcom is destroying Royal Mail.
It's thousands and thousands of job losses, of course, but more importantly, in some ways, it's the end of a great British institution, a public service that's still important to the public and to businesses. If Royal Mail have got a leadership that don't want to deliver the USO, well, then they're in the wrong business. And our view is that we could easily find ways of growing Royal Mail. If you let them get on with the job, they will come up with different ways.
Councils are set to receive £500 million in an emergency bailout to avert a cash crisis. It comes after the government came under pressure from MPs to boost the funding for councils on the brink of bankruptcy. The funding will be initially used for children's and adult social care for this and next year. However, reports suggest many councils believe the funding will only prevent a financial crisis in the short term. MPs will debate the UK's military action against Houthi rebels in Yemen as the Prime Minister flags further airstrikes if the attacks on commercial ships continue. Rishi Sunak resisted calls to allow for a vote in the Commons after a second joint strike was carried out with the US. But MPs will still be able to express their views on Britain's involvement in the defensive action. A Russian military transport plane has crashed near the Ukrainian border. Reports say it was carrying Ukrainian prisoners of war who were to be exchanged in a swap. The IRA news agency cited Russia's defence ministry, saying there were 65 Ukrainian prisoners on board, with 6 crew members and 3 others. Reports say there were no survivors. There was no immediate information on the cause. Storm Jocelyn has brought more travel disruption to the UK just days after Storm Isha killed 2 people and left thousands without power. The 10th named storm of the season caused flooding in York. Flights have also been cancelled and motorists warned to postpone their journeys. Forecasters expect winds to gradually ease from the south as the storm moves away throughout the day. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Ben and Emily.
Well, there's a huge amount of turmoil in the Conservative Party. Senior Tories have warned against another round of damaging infighting. That's after the former Cabinet Minister, Sir Simon Clarke, called for the Prime Minister to be replaced as leader to avoid what he has called a Conservative massacre at the general election. Is that helpful?
I mean, some would argue it's coming regardless, but Home Secretary James Cleverly, he said it would be foolish to have further dissent within the party. Meanwhile, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, he said division and another PM would lead to the certain loss of power for the Tories.
Yes, meanwhile at PMQs, Prime Minister's Question Time, Sir Keir Starmer criticised the government over their latest round of infighting.
Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. And that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
I mean, they've both got a point there, don't they? Really. Weather vane and also massive Tory infighting. Can't disagree with any of that, anyway.
Yeah, a shambles on both sides of the benches. It's actually quite embarrassing that that's similar to what some would say in America, that these are the options. Do you know what I mean?
Available.
Yeah.
Only 2 options available. Well, there are other options. You can vote for other parties, of course.
Starmer, meanwhile, in PMQs just earlier, he also criticised Sunak's childcare plan and, once again, called into question the stability of the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak's position.
That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete show.
Well, there we go. We bleeped that out because that was a bit of swearing in the chamber. So shall we speak with GBNews political correspondent Olivia Rutley? That was a little taste of what PMQs was like today. Olivia, it was a particularly febrile atmosphere, it seemed, watching PMQs from the outside. Anyway, do you think either landed any punches?
I would absolutely agree with you, Emily. From my position inside the Commons, it felt very febrile indeed. Both of them were hurling personal insults at each other. Rishi Sunak went down the culture wars road, which was quite an interesting tack. He accused Starmer of not knowing what a woman is, of fighting for terrorists when he was head of the CPS. He talked about his record in schools, etc. And Keir Starmer hit back by saying that Rishi Sunak made millions off the back of working people during the financial crisis. It felt very much like a gloves off pre-general election PMQs. There was interesting reactions from both parties. Last night, when Sir Simon Clarke wrote in The Telegraph that blistering attack on Rishi Sunak, where he said that he would like to see him removed from office, there were worries in Number 10 that MPs would start queuing up behind him and that there might be a threat to Rishi Sunak's leadership. That is not how it played out at all. In fact, MPs rallied around Rishi Sunak, and there were all sorts of different MPs who publicly came out with their support for the Prime Minister last night. Liz Truss, no friend to Rishi Sunak at all. Priti Patel as well. So it looked this noon, as though the Prime Minister was actually on pretty sure footing. There were huge cheers from the Tory backbenches when Rishi Sunak came in. So it might just be actually that this morning Number 10 aides are feeling quite relieved. It feels almost as though that boil has been lanced. Last week there were a number of rebels on the Tory backbenches who actually refused to vote for the Prime Minister's Rwanda legislation. Well, now one of them, Simon Clarke, has stepped forward and said what the others are probably thinking, that Rishi Sunak should go. But there hasn't been a wave of enthusiasm accompanying that letter. So Number 10 aides will probably be breathing a bit of a sigh of relief this morning. It was a nasty PMQs, and I expect we can see lots more of the same going forwards. The only time when we really heard about policy was when Keir Starmer talked about that childcare plan, which we know is now in chaos. I've been following the story since the beginning, when it was announced in the budget last March. And in September, I actually spoke to some of the biggest nursery chains in the country who said that they hadn't heard a peep from the government since the announcement was made. Now, that was 6 months ago, and it seems as though the government has only just got its act together, really, and started talking about how it's going to go, which, as Keir Starmer pointed out, 8 weeks before the supposed rollout is looking a little bit dicey. So I think that was probably when Rishi Sunak was on the shakiest ground this morning. Otherwise, it was a battle of flinging personal insults, and no one really came out on top.
Thank you very much. GBNews political correspondent Olivia Utley, who was there in the chamber taking notes for us. Simon Clarke's piece in The Telegraph calling for Rishi Sunak's head was pretty vicious, brutal. He said things like, he said the Conservatives will be massacred under Rishi Sunak's leadership. He said he's not solely responsible for our present predicament, but his uninspiring leadership is the main obstacle to our recovery. He's gone from an asset to an anchor.
Yes, he also said this is leading to an ever greater disconnect between rulers and ruled and has opened the door to extremists. He was mentioning that the biggest political crisis facing developed nations is that the electorate can't get what they need and are being given what they don't want. Olivia made a point there saying that Simon hasn't had much backing publicly from other MPs. He said Priti Patel came out and rubbished him, also David Davies. But the thing is, with those two specifically, they've got massive majorities. Priti in Whittam has got something like a 25,000 majority. She's not going to risk her seat at the next election by savaging Sunak, even if he goes.
Individual constituencies.
And isn't the most important thing not whether MPs come out publicly to back Simon Clarke and attack Rishi, but whether they hand those letters in to Sir Graham Brady?
And of course, we will be talking about Lee Anderson's comments too a little later on the show. He's suggesting that he should have voted with the government on the Rwanda bill and that he'd take back his job as deputy chairman of the party.
Come on, Lee.
If he were offered it. So what's going on in Lee Anderson?
I never want to hear Lee Anderson call Keir Starmer Sir Flip-Flop again, because that title arguably belongs to Lee now.
Well, there you go, fighting talk. Now, Donald Trump's quest to become the Republican nominee for this year's presidential election gained further momentum last night as he comfortably won the New Hampshire primary.
Yes, with most of the ballots counted, the former president holds a 12-point lead over his last remaining rival, Nikki Haley, who has said, quote, the race is far from over, and she's vowed to fight on despite suffering a second consecutive defeat to Donald Trump.
Yes, so for more on this, let's speak to GB News reporter Ray Addison, who is taking a keen interest in everything that's going on in the States. Nikki Haley says she'll fight on as the only other Republican candidate in the race. Is it worth her fighting on?
Well, it really depends. Obviously, she has to keep the momentum going in order to convince her financial backers to keep supporting her. I know that as of today, I'm seeing reports that she's actually increased her media buying spend in South Carolina. That is, of course, where the next primary is going to be held. That's her hometown as well. And she's had several elected roles there. And so, state, I should have said. And therefore, of course, you know, it's somewhere where she would hope to be winning. However, the latest polling data, which is carried out coincidentally by Donald Trump's PAC, does suggest that he's about 39, 40 points ahead of her. Older polling, which is perhaps not carried out by one of his PACs, is about 30 points ahead as well. So he's got quite a commanding lead and she's got quite a lot to make up.
Ray, Trump called Nikki Haley an imposter last night and said that she gave a victory speech when she lost, and she's obviously failed to leave the race, and endorse Donald Trump. Well, was that typical Trump savagery, or was he a bit OTT?
No, it's really interesting, actually. She came out pretty quickly after the polls had been closed and actually had just been called for Trump by most of the news networks. And she came out within about an hour when he had only about a 7-point lead, as he was saying in the intro. That's gone up to about 12 points now. And at first you think, OK, she's going to concede now. She's not only conceding New Hampshire, but she's going to suspend her campaign. That didn't happen. She doubled down. She said she's going to carry on. And he admitted when he did his own speech, he said, you know, I came out here to say something completely different, but she's made me angry. I'm angry with her, like he said, for being an imposter, in his words. And he felt like she should be stepping aside. You know, he had other former challengers, Vivek Ramaswamy, and other challengers behind him, endorsing him. And, you know, I think he just feels that this is really his opportunity now. She needs to step aside. Interestingly, President Biden issued his own statement saying it's clear now that this contest is going to be between myself and Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear now by Nikki Haley not conceding she's going to be nowhere near being looked at for Trump's vice president if he wins a second term. But Ray Addison, GB News reporter, thank you very much. For more analysis now, we're joined by Dr. Thomas Gift, who's the founding director of the University of College London's Centre on US Politics. Dr. Gift, can I ask you, please, the vote last night was open not just to Republicans, but to everybody. It was a public vote. And I was watching US cable network TV last night, and you had a lot of Democrats going to vote for Nikki Haley, even though they'd never vote Republican in the general election, simply to spite Trump. So the result was a bit skewed, wasn't it?
I think you're absolutely right, Ben, and it's great to be with you. New Hampshire is quite unique in that you can have crossover votes, both including independents as well as Democrats. And there was this big get out to vote effort by the left to try to get some of those voters to support Nikki Haley, if nothing else, to winnow Donald Trump's margin of victory. But even that wasn't enough. And at the end of the day, if you're Nikki Haley, it's not a recipe for success to court moderate and independent voters if you're trying to get the Republican nomination. That works fine in a general, but certainly not in a Republican primary. And so as we go further and further into South Carolina, into Super Tuesday, and if Nikki Haley has any aspirations of continuing beyond that, she's going to have to reach out to the right wing. I just don't see it. The MAGA base is firmly on the side of Donald Trump.
We were talking to Anthony Scaramucci yesterday on the show, and he insisted that even if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, he has not expanded his voter base. Yes, he has a very ardent support from certain sections of society, but he won't in any way have expanded that. What are your thoughts?
Well, Emily, I think that that's correct, but at the same time, Joe Biden hasn't expanded his circle of support either. And if anything, he's seeing a diminishment of backers within the progressive wing of the party who has to be concerned will not show up on election day. So I really think that we're in this era of post-persuasion politics. Essentially, neither side is doing very much to persuade swing voters, moderate voters. And that could be because with this rematch, everybody sort of knows what they're getting. The writing is on the wall, and so they've made up their mind. And so it's ultimately going to be a game about who can turn out the base. But clearly, this is an unpopular choice. About 75% of Americans don't want a Donald Trump versus Joe Biden redux, and yet that's what we're going to get.
That's really interesting. Post-persuasion politics. There's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. Dr. Gift, one final question, please. You're an American in London. Who is going to be best for Britain out of Biden and Trump?
Oh, gosh, I spend so much of my time focusing on domestic politics. I'm not sure there's a clear winner on that particular contest. We did see more of a close relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom under Trump when Boris Johnson was prime minister, but I think that was largely just a function of their personal relationship. A lot of international relations just comes down to a personal rapport. When it comes to Sunak, I'm not sure if he has much of a relationship with either candidate. So if we're thinking about a future US-UK trade deal, I just don't see it as a priority.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Dr. Thomas Gift. Very good to speak to you, founding director of the University of College London Centre on US politics. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not actually bothered who wins, to be fair, but I do love the further Trump gets, it winds.
You're not bothered?
I'd probably favour Trump, but I'm not totally invested in it. But it makes me, I do enjoy the further Trump gets, and he's like Teflon, isn't he? Teflon Trump. No matter what they throw at him, he keeps going, and it just winds up all the best people, and I enjoy that quite thoroughly.
Yeah, interesting that all about turnout will be. Who can get the vote out? Coming up, the Sussexes are again in the headlines, but arguably for the wrong reasons, this time over a photograph of the Jamaican Prime Minister last night on the red carpet. More on that after this short break.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 1:26 p.m. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Right now, two of my favourite people we're going to move on to, the Sussexes. They've once again been hitting the headlines after being photographed with the Jamaican Prime Minister last night.
Yes, now Harry and Meghan attended the One Love premiere to celebrate the life and music of Bob Marley.
And while there, they were seen chatting and posing with the Jamaican PM Andrew Holness, who has been vocal about his desire to cut ties with King Charles.
So, was this a little bit insensitive? Joining us for more is royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, some criticism levelled at the pair over this decision to pose with the Jamaican president while hobnobbing on the glitzy red carpet.
Yeah, exactly, Emily. Pose is the key words there, pictured alongside the Jamaican Prime Minister, which in itself is quite controversial, bearing in mind Prince Harry is the King's son, and the Jamaican Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, has, for some time now, expressed his desire for Jamaica to cut ties with King Charles completely and become a republic. We are expecting them to pass legislation this year to have a referendum on becoming a republic. And this is just a couple of years after he met with the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, Prince William, Princess Catherine, where, during that, quite frankly, not very good Commonwealth tour that they went on, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, the Jamaican Prime Minister said to them, in front of the media, in front of the cameras, we are moving on. In other words, we don't want to be a republic anymore. So the fact that both Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have posed with them has proved a bit of a controversial, pretty controversial, to be honest, and could have all sorts of political and Commonwealth implications. But of course, they're no longer working members of the royal family. They're allowed to go onto the red carpet. They're not dictated to by either King Charles or the British government. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, really.
Cameron, I've got a bit of a problem with this because not only are they cozying up to a Prime Minister and a country who, as you said, just last year suggested that he wanted to cut ties with the monarchy, Harry and Meghan, who profess to be bastions of compassion and humanity and forgiveness and whatever else, they're doing this at a time when the Princess of Wales, Kate, is undergoing or has undergone abdominal surgery. She's recovering in hospital. Prince Charles has or will be undergoing prostate surgery. And if you want to go that far as well, the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, she's dealing with a new cancer diagnosis. Are Harry and Meghan that insensitive, or are they just a bit stupid?
Well, many members of the royal family, whether they're working or not, appear to be keeping calm and carrying on. But there is a key difference, perhaps, with Harry and Meghan. So, for example, in the last couple of days, we've seen the Queen undertake a number of engagements to do with supporting victims of domestic violence. Just today, the Duchess of Edinburgh was supporting menstrual health of young girls in East London. The Duke of Edinburgh is representing the country in South Africa and St Helena. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are posing on a red carpet. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex do no charity work or humanitarian work. Far from it, they clearly do. But it's the timing, isn't it, as with everything else that's going on with, as you mentioned, the health of the King, the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of York as well. But, of course, you know, they're free humans. They can do what they want.
Come on, why would they be at this premiere? I mean, they get invited to so many events.
They always go to weird events, don't they?
What's so special about this event with the opening of an envelope?
There's been a lot of speculation online, and of course there's been no confirmation of it either way, but they were spotted chatting or networking, as some papers have put it, with the boss of Paramount Pictures, who is the distributing company for the film Bob Marley, One Love. As we know, the Spotify deal that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have was prematurely cut short. One executive called them grifters. Netflix, of course, they still have a deal with. But perhaps some people are speculating they could be trying to cosy up with the boss of Paramount to try and get a new media deal. Now, that's not been confirmed, and that is just speculation. But, of course, seeing them pictured with the boss of Paramount's pictures on the red carpet, you know, you can make up your own mind.
This isn't about them being big fans of Bob Marley. Then it's about business.
It's probably a replica of that time when Harry, well, it was Meghan and Harry sort of tagged along in the background when she was pretty much begging the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger, for some sort of work or a contract.
Well, the girl's got to eat. Thank you, Cameron. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent.
And also, so they want some new gig with Paramount. What are they going to talk about? They've
dished the dirt.
They've dished the dirt. They've done the laundry. What's new?
Yeah, it's a story you can only tell once, really, isn't it? But hey, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But coming up, the Prime Minister comes out fighting after dramatic calls from his own benches to resign last night. We'll be discussing that rather febrile Prime Minister's questions with our panel after your headlines.
Emily, thank you very much. 1:32. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of being bullied by his own MPs as today's Prime Minister's questions were dominated by allegations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke warned of an electoral massacre for the government, writing in the Daily Telegraph that the Tories need a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticisms, accusing Labour of not understanding British values. But Sir Keir seized on the editorial, saying that Tory infighting had descended into a long-running soap opera.
We've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why his butterer hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Donald Trump swept to victory in the New Hampshire primary overnight, demonstrating his tight grip over the Republican Party's hard right. The former president took 55% of the vote, beating his last remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, while President Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. Ms. Haley, who's a former ambassador to the United Nations, is vowing to fight on, promising to stay in the race until Super Tuesday on the 5th of March, when 15 states and 1 territory hold their votes. ScotRail's now resuming services after trains were suspended last night due to Storm Jocelyn. These are live pictures coming to us from the Shetland Islands, where you can see conditions are still quite blustery. It's the 10th named storm of the season, hitting much of Britain just 2 days after Storm Isha claimed 2 lives. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2749 and €1.1689. The price of gold, £1,595 and 73 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,513 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:38 and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain with me, Emily Carver, and Ben Leo. Now, we're going to get to our panel and introduce our panel very soon, but the North Yorkshire Police and Emergency Services have created a fake terror attack on York Minster to prepare for a terror attack if it were to ever happen.
Yes, it comes in the wake of the Manchester Arena bombing, and it's being coordinated by the North East branch of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has this story.
This is Operation Obtundity, a planned exercise at York Minster to prepare emergency services for a real-life terror attack. Police, fire and rescue and ambulance crews descended upon the cathedral in response to a staged acid assault upon a VIP visitor, a hostile vehicle and knife attack, and a siege, all involving 300 volunteers. The iconic landmark is one that needs protecting as it's visited by thousands each year, including royalty.
It's at least 12 months in the planning this exercise and comes at a really important juncture for York Minster, for the police we have here. It was less than 12 months ago we had the King and the Queen here for the Royal Maundy. So high profile, very high profile visitors do happen regularly at York Minster. We need to be prepared.
The exercise is part of a regular counter-terrorism programme which takes place across high-profile venues in the UK to test the response of emergency services to a series of no-notice violent attacks to stop them and save lives.
This scenario is really important for us to practice. Sadly, terrorist incidents like this have happened in the past. We've had the Manchester Arena inquiry, and the learning outcomes from that have driven all blue light services to train and prepare in this way. We want to improve from things that have happened in the past, and this is the best way to do that, to train together as blue light services, challenge our people as much as we can, and we've done that this evening just so people can prepare in the right way should this sadly happen in the future.
The operation was invaluable for all emergency services, including fire and rescue, who saved and treated casualties at the scene.
It's a long time in the making, is this. You know, it's not every day you get to run around the Minster like we are and putting people with legs and blood everywhere. And it's extremely important for us to, one, test as a fire service our response and our procedures, but two, to test that multi-agency response and the procedures that go with that as well.
To prosecute those responsible for a terrorist attack, it's crucial for police to interview all witnesses, and a command centre was set up near the Minster for police to hone their skills.
Obviously, there's a long-term investigation that would come out of something like this, and we have what we call the golden hour principle, which is about capturing that key evidence as early as possible, because obviously, as time goes on, people's memories fade, and so that vital information can be lost. So it's really important that we capture as much detail as possible from them at an early stage.
Emergency services here in North Yorkshire are now more prepared than ever for a terrorist attack, should the worst happen. Anna Riley, GB News, York.
That's all a bit ominous, isn't it? We're being asked to conscribe to fight Russia. Now we're practising for terror attacks.
Yeah, well, at least it's going on behind the scenes.
Feel good, eh? Feel good vibes.
Feel good vibes. But it's time to go through the biggest stories hitting the headlines with the former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn, Matt Zarb cousin, and political commentator Patrick O'Flynn. Thank you very much for joining us today. So shall we get stuck into what we saw at PMQs? It seemed to us a little bit same old, same old. Lots of slinging of insults, Patrick, but did we find out anything?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak, it was notable that he became the sort of right-wing culture warrior on a few things, berating Keir Starmer, for instance, for allegedly not knowing what a woman is.
Yes.
Now, I remember a couple of years ago when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor and he was asked to define a woman on a live broadcast, and he wouldn't answer the question, and he just said...
So he pontificated.
He just said, I agree with what Boris Johnson says.
Exactly. So he's not credible on these things, but I thought it was quite instructive that he felt the need to try and line up with the cultural right of his party, and people have commented that he seemed to be getting a lot of cheering and order paper waving from Tory MPs, so maybe that means the threat against him has gone. I just say, I remember a good few years ago now, Ian Duncan Smith went to a Tory conference as leader. He got 9 standing ovations in his speech. 6 weeks later, they dumped him.
Matt, is it the case that Rishi Sunak isn't really a culture warrior? He's just... He's just playing playing the game and playing a bit of pantomime because he thinks it's the red meat that the voters want. I don't particularly believe him, do you?
I think he's trying to reassure his base in Parliament. I think he's trying to keep that side of the Tory party on side. Clearly, it's something that divides the left. Clearly, these types of issues are, they cut right across Keir Starmer's base. So I think it's a sensible strategy in some respects for the Tories to amplify these culture war issues, but I don't think it will take them far enough to just focus on culture war issues. I think they have to find things on the economic side that are going to divide the left. So, for example, if Sunak wanted to raise the threshold at which you pay 40% tax to £100,000 or something along those lines, then that would be something that Starmer would have to support, but lots of his base would object to. I think the next election is going to be defined by economic issues, and Sunak has to have an offer that A, addresses those economic concerns, and B, divides Starmer's base, and I just don't see that he has that at the moment.
Does Rishi Sunak called Keir Starmer a weather vane, i.e. he goes with the wind, changes direction every day. Does Keir Starmer make you miss your old boss in that position, the old Jeremy Corbyn? At least he's stuck to his principles, even though they didn't go down too well.
Well, you knew where Jeremy stood on issues and he had an agenda and a vision for the country. I think someone like Starmer is quite a terrifying prospect in that you only have to go back 4 years to see what he was saying in the leadership contest. I was working on a rival leadership contest at the time, but and that was for the left-wing candidate, and there was you couldn't divide on policy. There was no dividing lines with Starmer whatsoever. And now to see how much of a journey that he's taken the Labour Party on in that time, to really support things that are completely antithetical to what he stood for in 2020, that's very dangerous. And the fact that the Tories, for my entire adult life, the Tories have been quite competent at, winning elections. And the moment that they've kind of imploded, Starmer is the leader of the opposition, someone who we can't really decipher who he is, what his agenda is, what his vision is for the country, and he's going to potentially become Prime Minister. That's quite a worrying prospect.
Patrick, is that going to be Starmer's Achilles heel, the fact that he campaigned and wanted to get Jeremy Corbyn in government?
No, I don't think so now. I think
Do people care anymore?
It's all quite a while ago. They care a little bit, but Rishi Sunak's got a bit of a nerve calling Starmer a human weather vane. Not so long ago, Rishi Sunak was telling ministers when he was Chancellor he didn't believe in the Rwanda policy. Now he thinks it's the most important thing. Allegedly, Rishi Sunak was quite happy to wade through enormous levels of legal migration, and now he's trying to be credible as a mass migration sceptic. I think the truth is that Starmer and Sunak are quite similar, really. Neither of them are big communicators or great conviction
politicians. 2 cheeks
politicians.
of the same behind, Patrick.
Well, that's quite a vulgar way that some people are characterising it. But
sorry.
Behave yourself.
I thought it was, a nice turn of phrase.
Patrick, from the, that's Reform's perspective, isn't it? It's the uni party. There's a cigarette paper between the two. Is there any inroads for Reform, or is it just complete pie in the sky? And also, another question, is it just Reform's aim to annihilate the Tories completely, regardless of whether they get a seat or not?
Well, Reform, including Richard Tice, the leader, and Ben Habib, the deputy leader, have talked about they want to obliterate the Conservatives. I think that's saying the quiet part out loud, and what they should be telling the British people is, and the Conservatives, is this isn't about you anymore, you're over, here are the new ideas to drive Britain to a better position. I think that'd be much better for Reform. I do think they've got great prospects in the 2 parliamentary by-elections next month.
Yes. I agree with you on that. The tactics should be forget about the Tories, and otherwise it just looks a bit...
weird. I mean, who gets up in the morning and thinks, I want to obliterate the Tories? You think about your living standards or law and order in your street, and I just think Reform needs to get into those actual...
Also, more like we could govern the country better than
exactly
this lot,
so.
rather than making it necessarily personal.
Do you know what a lot of die-hard Tory members are saying? They're saying that the day Boris Johnson was ousted for, this is how they describe it, having cake in Downing Street from Tupperware, and a lot of the MPs he helped get into power turned their back on him and stabbed him in the back. He was he won an 80-seat majority in 2019. He was arguably one of the greatest campaigners in Conservative history. The day they ousted him was the day that they lost this election. Do you think that's right, Matt?
I think probably Johnson would be in a better position now than Sunak. I think that the worst thing that could happen now for the Conservatives is another leadership contest. I think that the only thing that will save Sunak is if the economy starts to recover, and then he can go into an election with that record. If the Conservative brand is so tainted at the moment that a change of leader is not going to give them the bounce that the Tory right thinks it is.
I just feel like they've lost all trust.
Yeah, well,
people are so disillusioned.
I mean, I would say that Boris is not some great answer, because the truth is Boris Johnson's a brilliant campaigner who betrayed his 2019
He was a disappointment, wasn't he?
On immigration, right? Rishi Sunak is a terrible communicator who betrayed the Tory 2019 coalition. So he's got a double whammy of negatives.
Yeah.
Boris at least had some...
But sometimes that's all you need these days, a bit of optimism, a bit of oomph, a bit of character, and get people feeling good.
For one Prime Minister to hold together such a disparate coalition of voters, though? Perhaps it is very difficult without something like Brexit to mobilise that feeling of unity. Anyway, now, have you noticed, Patrick, that we're being told quite a lot that we're heading for all-out war, World War III, at least a war with Russia, and now there's talk of conscription. I'm talking about this warning from the head of the British Army, saying that we may not be prepared in the event of the war, of a war, and people are going to have to, get their military uniform on.
Well, I certainly think, David Miliband, when he was Foreign Secretary, once got roundly mocked for standing up at Labour conference and saying the world is a dangerous place. But I do think in the last couple of years, obviously, the world has got more dangerous. But I have to say the whole idea of conscription I think is ludicrous and antiquated. And the social solidarity in Britain that we used to have in both the Great War and the Second World War, fighting as a unified country with a unified culture and a patriotic feeling across the political divide, that's completely gone.
Wouldn't a bit of national service help with that?
No, I don't think so. I think seeing people like Tobias Ellwood, who's been one of the Liberal Conservatives who's presided over the complete breakdown of our national culture, and you see Islamist mobs on our streets intimidating our schools. You have white working class people thinking we're always to blame for everything. We're unfashionable. We're told we're privileged.
Well, that's the
There's
thing.
a feeling that no one would know what they're fighting for.
You've got people who can't even fly the Union flag or St George's flag without being called racist. We had that taxi driver from Shropshire the other day who won that battle with the council. So on what planet are you going to expect people to go and fight for king and country when they're not even allowed to fly their national flag, Matt?
I think you have to look at, like, if we've not got enough members of the armed forces, you have to look at why that is. I mean, it's years and years of cuts to defence spending. The numbers in the armed forces have gone down consistently. And I'm sorry to do the lefty thing and bring it back to austerity, but you can't have security on the cheap. That's the reality. But this idea that we're heading for World War III, there's obviously a this kind of multipolar world. Isn't that what the nukes are for? Isn't that what we're told all the time? We've got nuclear weapons as a deterrent. So why are we at risk if we've got nuclear weapons? And why are we talking about conscription into the armed forces?
But would you like us to give up our nuclear deterrent, though? That was a Jeremy Corbyn policy, was it not?
But the argument that's made by proponents of having a nuclear deterrent is...
But that doesn't stop necessarily invasions that we need to fight back against.
I think you'll find that Ukraine had a nuclear deterrent, gave it up, and it didn't really work out very well.
Well, they gave it up on the promise that we'd be there to look after them.
They no longer had their own nuclear deterrent.
And also, got invaded. It's important to distinguish here between national service and conscription. Of course, national service is 2 or 3 years, as they do in Israel, of military service where you do some training and you toughen up and you learn how advanced scouts, I guess. And conscription, of course, is going to war.
Well, I'm sorry, if we were to go into an all-out war, I would expect men and women in this country to step up.
I wouldn't. Why would you?
Of course I would.
Why would you when we have an open border policy? We've got 500 people a day crossing the border.
Country, take all the benefits of this country. You are British, you have a passport here, this is your country, you should defend it.
Does that include the small boat arrivals and the 700k a year people coming in legally?
Well,
are they expected to fight for Britain?
But why would anyone invade Britain? There's no natural resources. There's no reason for anyone to be a ground invasion of Britain.
Well, if we're getting warnings from the head of the army, the British Army, that we are in dire straits and it may well come down to conscription, we should listen. Or do you think this is just warmongering and fear-mongering?
I think there's certainly a debate going on among the senior forces people about expanding their share of public spending, understandably. But I think it's right what Ben says, that we don't know what values we're meant to be defending anymore, right? So I think it's very unreasonable and it's just unrealistic to expect our finest young men and women to be jumping forward to fight and die for their country when the country's giving no signal about what it is.
But if there was an obvious and clear threat to the future of this country,
in terms of an actual land invasion, I think people would step up.
We're going to have to hold that there because we're back in the next couple of minutes with this. But coming up, Rishi Sunak accuses Keir Starmer of being a human weather vane. We'll have more of that clip and the rest of the feisty PMQs action in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Storm Jocelyn is now moving away, but it will still be fairly windy out there through the day, but still feeling mild with plenty more sunshine. This area of low pressure is Storm Jocelyn. You can see as it moves away, we've still got quite a few isobars across mainly northern and eastern areas. That's where we've got a wind warning still in force through the first part of the afternoon, particularly across the Pennines is where we could see some very strong gusty winds. But it will be dry, much drier than yesterday, with plenty of sunshine sunshine, fairly hazy sunshine having said that, and we'll see a risk of showers, particularly across northwestern Scotland. In the south and west, though, we'll see clouds start to build through this afternoon. That will bring in some milder temperatures as well. We'll see that cloud thicken across the southwest, pushing northwards throughout tonight. Ahead of it should stay clear and dry, particularly across the north and east of England and Scotland. And here we could see some mist and fog, low cloud over the hills, but also a touch of frost, as it will be a chillier night here than recently. However, elsewhere, a different story. Another very mild night, but it will be a cloudy and damp night, and that sets us up for Thursday. A much cloudier day, drizzly rain coming in, particularly across western areas over the hills of Wales, as well as Scotland and northern England through the day. So quite a lot of cloud and drizzly rain, but it will be on the milder side of things once again, potentially highs of 13 or 14 degrees, which is fairly high for the time of year. Have a great day.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 24th of January.
It is indeed. Now, commotion in the Commons. The Prime Minister comes out fighting after dramatic calls from his own benches to resign last night. Now, Rishi Sunak accused Sir Keir Starmer of being a human weather vane, while the Labour leader mocked the Prime Minister for being bullied by his own party. But did either of them actually land a punch?
And for King and Country, the head of the army warns Brits will be called up to fight if the UK goes to war with Russia because the military's too small. So would you support conscription?
Insensitive Sussexes. As the King and Princess of Wales endure medical procedures back home, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were photographed posing with the Jamaican Prime Minister on the red carpet last night. This is a man who wants to cut ties with the British monarchy. What exactly is their game plan here? Now, we were talking about the issue of conscription, and I did appear to argue that, yes, we should all be willing to fight for our country if we're under attack.
Even you?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Maybe if I ask myself genuinely if I'd be willing to...
Come on, all about equality here. Equality of gender.
Then it becomes a more difficult prospect, so perhaps I was a little gun-ho.
Also, there's two separate conversations here. There's one about whether Russia would invade the UK, as we were just talking about with our panel, and separately whether, for example, Russia invaded a NATO country such as Poland. Would you get up off your sofa, head to Eastern Europe and defend Poland as part of NATO?
Yes, and if I had sons, would I want them to go off to fight in a potentially bloody war? Of course I wouldn't. But is it our civic duty? Is it our duty as citizens of this country to do our bit?
I think
if we were to be genuinely under attack.
Ultimately, if it came to it, you'd have to say yes, but there's so much disillusionment with people at the moment, with the state of the country, with the march towards net zero, where people can't afford to pay their bills, with the southern border, the boats coming in, legal migration, nothing works. People aren't happy. So when you're asking them, under that context, to go and fight and give their life for king and country, there's going to be a lot of reluctance.
But it doesn't help that patriotism often is seen as a bit of a dirty word in this country. So why would you fight for your country if you feel like patriotism...
You can't even fly the St George's flag without Emily Thornberry calling you or suggesting that it's something a bit strange with it. So why would you go and give your life for the country under that context?
Let us know what you think at home. gbviews@gbnews.com. We're going to be having a feisty head-to-head on that very matter coming up very soon. But first, your headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. 2 minutes past 2, this is the latest. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of being bullied by his own MPs as today's Prime Minister's questions were dominated by allegations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke warned of an electoral massacre for the government. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, the Tories need a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticisms, accusing Labour of not understanding Britain's values. But Sir Keir seized on the editorial, saying that Tory infighting had descended into a long-running soap opera.
We've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Donald Trump swept to victory in the New Hampshire primary overnight, demonstrating his tight grip over the Republican Party's hard right. The former president took 55% of the vote, beating his last remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, while President Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. Ms. Haley, who's a former ambassador to the United Nations, is vowing to fight on, promising to stay in the race until Super Tuesday on the 5th of March, when 15 states and 1 territory hold their votes. The government says it's committed to postal deliveries 6 days a week, despite a report by Ofcom suggesting that some days could be cut to save costs. Number 10 says the government will engage with the options outlined by the regulator, but insists deliveries on Saturdays will remain. Ofcom says it's vital the postal service is modernised to meet the evolving needs of consumers. Other options include slowing down deliveries, with most letters taking 3 or more days to arrive. But Communication Workers Union General Secretary Dave Ward says the changes risk destroying Royal Mail.
It's thousands and thousands of job losses, of course, but more importantly, in some ways, it's the end of a great British institution, a public service that's still important to the public and to businesses. If Royal Mail have got a leadership that don't want to deliver the USO, well, then they're in the wrong business. And our view is that we could easily find ways of growing Royal Mail. If you let them get on with a job, they will come up with different ways.
Councils are set to receive £500 million in an emergency bailout to avert a cash crisis. It comes after MPs called for a funding boost for struggling councils on the brink of bankruptcy. The money will initially be used for children's and adult social care over the next 18 months. However, reports suggest many councils. A Russian military transport plane has crashed near the Ukrainian border. Reports say it was carrying Ukrainian prisoners of war who were due to be exchanged in a swap. The IRA news agency cited Russia's defence ministry saying there were 65 Ukrainian prisoners on board, with 6 crew members and 3 others. Reports say there were no survivors. There was no immediate information on the cause. ScotRail is now resuming its services after trains were suspended last night due to Storm Jocelyn. These are live pictures coming to us from the Shetland Islands, where, as you can see, conditions are still quite blustery. The storm left thousands without power in Scotland. It's the 10th named storm of the season, hitting much of Britain just 2 days after Storm Isha claimed 2 lives. And if you think technology has been evolving too quickly over the past few years, consider the leaps we've made since Steve Jobs introduced us to the first Macintosh computer.
I'd like to let Macintosh speak for itself.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
It was on this day 40 years ago that the Apple co-founder unveiled an innovation that changed everything. The user-friendly machine marked a key turning point, breaking away from the business-focused PCs of the past with an appeal to the everyday consumer. And it was an immediate success, with 70,000 Macs sold in just 4 months, paving the way for another world-changing invention, the iPhone, more than 20 years later. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Ben and Emily.
Welcome back. It's 8 minutes past 2. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. I'm going to read you one very quick email from Lisa, who says, my granddaughter's new boyfriend, both 15, wants to join the army. She says it's been his dream since he was 7. We think he just wants to get out of Swindon.
Well, there you go. There's
Swindon's
one young recruit.
I like Swindon, by the way, to add a bit of balance. Swindon's a nice place.
Add a bit of balance. Well, there you go. Keep your views coming in on the conscription debate. It seems we're very divided.
Yeah, we'll get stuck into a few more of those emails in a bit. But let's move to the situation with the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak. Senior Tories have warned against another round of damaging infighting after former Cabinet Minister Sir Simon Clarke called for Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to be replaced as leader to avoid what he has called a Conservative massacre at the general election.
Yes, it was strong stuff from Sir Simon. Home Secretary James Cleverly said it would be foolish to have further dissent within the party. Meanwhile, former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said division and another Prime Minister would lead to the certain loss of power.
Meanwhile, at Prime Minister's questions a bit earlier today, Sir Keir Starmer criticised the government over their latest round of infighting.
Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant. and that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
Well, there we go, a bit of back and forth in the chamber. Now, the Labour leader also criticised the Prime Minister's childcare plan, and once again he called into question the stability of the Conservative Party and Sunak's position.
That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete show. Who was it who briefed that?
Gosh, language, Sakis.
Also, why did he turn slightly common then when he was like, who was it? Who was it? Where did that come from?
You know, it's sort of, you know, he wants to look like.
Talking of EastEnders, he sounded like he was Peggy Mitchell behind the bar. Who was it? Anyway,
a bit harsh on Peggy Mitchell.
Let's now speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope, who's in Westminster. Christopher, you tweeted some time ago saying that Simon Clarke's attempts to oust Rishi Sunak, according to senior Tory figures you'd spoken to, seems to have fizzled out already. One figure told you this coup won't have lasted 24 hours. Is it dead in the water already?
Yeah, is he looking a bit silly, Christopher?
It does feel he's gone about this the wrong way. I mean, the letter he wrote last night talked about in January. We're still in January. The letter felt like it was a letter to go out probably after the possible double by-election defeat for the Tory party on February the 15th at the Kingswood and Wellingborough by-elections. And then that'll be looking back on this event called the Popular Conservatism Rally, where Simon Clarke was a key speaker alongside Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg, our colleague at GB News, and Ranil Jayawardena. That's on the 6th of February. Instead, he's gone early with his letter, and it's kind of jeopardised other things. So I understand this Popular Conservatism event, other speakers now may be forced to pull out, because it now looks like it's some kind of alternative Tory party resistance plan or something against Rishi Sunak. I mean, it seems the wrong way round. And the strategy here, if it is to destabilise the PM, has been a bit wobbly. Having said that, I did get a text last night on my WhatsApps, which was, let me tell you, was alive last night with Tory MPs. Many MPs saying, what on earth is Clarke up to? But another one also quite interesting said that one idea being mooted at the moment is a Newt Gingrich-style 100-day contract with Britain. Now, that goes back to Newt Gingrich, who was the Republican senator back in 1994, published a contract with America ahead of the November midterms, and the Republican Party ran away to victory. So the idea is that someone like Penny Mordaunt could be installed as Prime Minister. She has a quick 100 days, then an election. This is the kind of thing I'm hearing. I mean, there's no real credibility to it. That no one really thinks that Rishi Sunak will be replaced. It is in the minds of some on the right, maybe some Trussites, some supporters of Liz Truss think it, Borisites, Boris Johnson supporters, but otherwise, you know, it is a bit fanciful. I did think, looking back at that PMQs, that PMQs, Sunak was very defensive. He basically went through the greatest hits of all the things you can say about Keir Starmer in about 5 minutes, just to try and show his team behind him that he's in charge.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, there may be some logic to wanting to replace Rishi Sunak. He's not exactly polling well, is he? But I can't help but think, for most people watching, it just looks like, well, it just looks ridiculous. You can't change the leader again without a general election immediately, surely.
No, I mean, it'd be the third or fourth one since 2019, fourth one since 2019. Yeah, I mean, it nuts, really. I think, having said that, would Labour rather face Penny Mordaunt or Rishi Sunak at the election? I think they'd prefer Sunak. I think Mordaunt does worry them. She does connect, and she will be a worry for Labour. I think that is understood. And she, of course, she narrowly lost out, didn't she, to Liz Truss, and then tried to do a deal, or tried to do something with fought Sunak and failed to get the number of MPs required to enter that ballot in October 22. I think that's an idea. I don't think it will last. Time is running out, and most serious people in the party are saying they need to knuckle down and get behind the PM now.
OK, Christopher Hope, our political editor in Westminster, thank you very much. Should have stuck with Boris Johnson, perhaps, shouldn't they, the Tories? But we move on.
That's one view. Yeah, we move on.
The Sussexes, Harry and Meghan, they've once again been hitting headlines after being photographed last night with the Jamaican Prime Minister.
Yes, Harry and Meghan attended the One Love premiere to celebrate the life and music of Bob Marley.
And while there, they were seen chatting and posing with Jamaica's PM, Andrew Holness, who has previously been vocal about his desire to cut ties with King Charles and the monarchy, and he's currently Jamaica's head of state.
Yes, well, joining us for more on this is the talent and PR manager, Jonathan Shalit. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Now, you're a talent and PR man, so you'll be used to some of your clients perhaps making silly decisions. Is this one, in your view, when it comes to Meghan and Harry?
I like the way you set up the question by saying silly decision, which is kind of indicating your viewpoint already. I'm not sure it's a silly decision. This is a movie about one of the greatest reggae star ever, and Meghan has black descent, and so she's been invited to the premiere and gone. I don't think one can criticise someone with black heritage going to a movie about a great reggae star.
But the headlines that have come out of it, though, accusations that they appear insensitive, members of the royal family unwell, in hospital, going through surgery and the like, and they're with a famous anti-monarchist. Is there nothing there that you think might be problematic?
I think they're two separate issues. First of all, travelling when a member of their family is not well. Well, they already live in Los Angeles, so they're hardly, if anything, they're going closer to their family than further away if they go to Jamaica. I'm not sure. It seems to me that both the King and the Princess of Wales have routine operations. They're not, life-threatening operations. And indeed, the Princess of Wales has had her operation. I'm not quite sure why you would expect them not to travel when their family members aren't well. I mean, my parents haven't been well, and I've continued travelling.
But Jonathan, they're travelling and doing that to a place and to a Prime Minister who last year suggested that they would leave the Commonwealth and remove themselves from links to the monarchy. It's not just the fact they're travelling when their family are ill. They're doing it at a time when, and schmoozing with people who have, in some aspects, attacked the monarchy.
Well, the King Charles may say that's responsible. He went to the celebration of Barbados going independent from the UK and flew over to Barbados as Barbados ended their time as part of the UK jurisdiction. The fact is, our dialogue is better. Dialogue is better than ignoring. And I think because someone's anti-monarchist, when we had a brutal slave trade in Jamaica hundreds of years ago, I'm not sure they can be attacked for going with a democratically elected Jamaican Prime Minister, if that's the policy of the country. I mean, Barbados has remained great friends with Britain, even though now totally independent. And many could say perhaps that's a good way of keeping positive relationships with Jamaica, with the brother to the next king being there. I think, there are positives here as well. I think this is an example of the media in Britain having one agenda.
Yeah.
Again, Meghan.
I mean, I wonder if it's... you make a good point there. You make a good point. But what about what they're doing there? Surely it's just to tout for business, schmoozing with people. Potentially there's some media types there, some bosses of big media companies that they can try and get some work off. Do you think this is more business than leisure?
At the end of the day, unless you are a lucky sperm, in other words, your parents give you tons of money or you've inherited tons of money, you've got to make a living. Previously we criticised Harry for living off the royal family while still a member of the royal family. He's made the decision to leave the royal family, therefore he's got to earn a living. I don't quite see why he'd be criticised for making a living, because if he didn't make a living, we'd criticise him for taking money off his father.
Jonathan, I take your point, but I think it's more because they've made a lot of money off the back of criticising the royal family, have they not? So there is always that.
Listen, absolutely, we're all aware of what's happened previously, what they've been paid for on the books they've published. But it seems to me that a woman of black heritage going to a film premiere of the most famous black reggae singer ever is not the most unnatural coupling. I think it's I'm Jewish. If there was a movie about the greatest Jew ever, I might travel to see that. I mean, why wouldn't Meghan travel to see a movie about Bob Marley? I mean, Bob Marley is such an incredible artist.
Yeah.
That's a great honour. And if they get a holiday in Jamaica as well, fantastic. They're entitled to go to sunny, nice places. I'm sure the two of you are going to have a nice holiday somewhere sunny this year.
I hope so. I hope so. My last holiday was in Norway, and it was absolutely freezing.
Mine was Iceland last weekend. Minus 20.
There's a volcano. Isn't there a volcano in Iceland?
Yeah, you can see the smoke billowing as you come in. Yeah, it's amazing, fantastic.
Well, it was absolutely brilliant to get your perspective. Perhaps you've softened mine a little bit. Jonathan,
what I do think is I don't follow the narrative of many people. I think there's a lot of criticism of Harry and Meghan that's unwarranted. I'm not saying it's all unwarranted, but there's a lot that's unwarranted. And it's interesting, overseas, they're viewed much more favourably than they are in the UK.
Well, I'm not sure in the States anymore. But anyway, we could argue this back and forth. But Jonathan Shalit, talent and PR manager, thank you very much for your perspective. Interesting.
Yes, now you're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up this hour.
Yes, we'll be debating whether it is time to consider reintroducing conscription. That's after a British military chief says that Brits face being called up to fight if we go to war with Russia because of current troop numbers. They're just simply too low. We'll have the debate. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 2:25. Thank you for watching Good Afternoon Britain. The head of the British Army has said that Brits face being called up to fight if we go to war with Russia because current troop numbers are simply too low.
General Sir Patrick Sanders, who's been very outspoken on the topic of dwindling troop numbers in recent years, has also spoken about his belief that there needs to be a, quote, shift in the mindset of the public so that they're willing to defend the UK against foreign enemies should they be mobilised. So is it time to consider reintroducing conscription?
Well, that's the question. To debate this, we're joined by former SAS trooper Phil Campion. Thank you, Phil. And former Royal Navy officer Dr. Steve Aiken. Well, Phil, I'll come to you first. Conscription, good idea if we face a threat?
Not necessarily conscription. I don't think a press-gown soldier will ever fight like a volunteer. However, we are in a position where the interesting thing out of this was the mindset of the British people has to change. And to do that, you do need some sort of community-based project for young people to take and be involved with so that their mindset can change towards wanting to actually be here and contribute should something go wrong. And don't forget, in times of peace, you need to prepare for war. So I think the General's been very shrewd in as far as he's realised that there's a problem, and if it escalated as quick as it could do, we would be in a very bad place very quickly.
So are you talking about national service, Phil?
Yeah, I'm talking about national service, but I'm not necessarily saying national service is the answer. I don't think that taking everybody and making them serve and cluttering up an already small army with a load of people that don't want to be there is the answer. I think that a community-based project where perhaps after a while you could pick people that you wanted to go on to the army would be worthwhile. It would also teach a lot of these people nowadays that haven't learned anything about respect and all the rest of it, a good few lessons so that they could want to contribute to the society.
Steve, say Russia came to our shores, should ordinary Brits be conscribed to fight them? And also, as a second question, what happens if Russia invaded a NATO country such as Poland? Would we be expected to go and help out in Eastern Europe?
Listen, sort of the war in the Ukraine has been a wake-up call. We need to be ready. And we've already heard from Admiral Barr in NATO. We've also heard from sort of the chief of the Norwegian General Staff. We've already seen across Europe, people are now realizing that, you know, the wake-up call is there. We need to get ready. Now, the reality is with an army of 70-odd thousand, it's far too small. But we need to be able to create a structure that can be able to train people. We're not ready to bring in a conscripted army yet. We need to build the mechanisms to be able to do that. And it's not just soldiers we're going to need. We're going to need cyber warriors. We're going to need all sorts of people who can fight in sort of the information battle space. We'll need more sailors. We'll need more airmen. And actually, we need to deal with our country's industrial capacity because we're going to have to be able to manufacture lots of things like drones. And we just saw this example this week. We're not going to be in a position to make virgin steel anymore in the United Kingdom. Those are real strategic issues that this government should have been sorting out by now, and we need to get on with it.
Yeah, you raise a number of pertinent points there. Would you agree also with Phil that maybe we have a bit of a cultural problem, that a lot of young people in this country just would not be up to it, wouldn't accept the need to?
No, Phil and I have both served. We have served with some great people from all backgrounds across all of the United Kingdom and beyond. I mean, I think the British people, when they realise what the real threat is, will get ready, because actually defending our nation is something of vital importance. And I think people understand it's there, but they also need to have the ability to be able to be trained and come into an organisation and be able to be used. That's the problem. We don't have the infrastructure to do that anymore. I mean, our reserves have been hollowed out. I mean, we don't even have, large numbers of cadets anymore. We've got to be able to work at all these things. So we need to build that infrastructure out. And I think we're running out of time. So one of the things we should be doing is having a real serious conversation across this nation about how we're capable of building up our armed forces and doing it quickly. And that includes all the other things that I've talked about.
Phil, we've had a lot of emails from viewers who said that why would they go and fight for their country, for king and country, and put their life on the line when they feel so disillusioned with the way things are going? They, especially young people, they don't own homes, they can't and won't have families because of that. They have problems with immigration and they disagree with net zero and so many other things. How do we re-engage those people and get them, back on side with Great Britain?
Right, it's one of those things, having that attitude when you're disgruntled with how things are going and things aren't going your way. But when the enemy actually knocks on your door, then things will escalate extremely a lot faster than you probably thought. And if you'd have said that to someone, say, for instance, in Ukraine 4 years ago, how do you feel about fighting? Well, I don't want to fight. Well, now you are fighting, aren't you? Okay, so sometimes the situation will dictate the response.
Yeah, so circumstances dictate, Steve. Actually, if we did have a threat on our shores, people would just get on with it. Steve? Is Steve there?
In Ukraine, they've seen what's happening in the Middle East. They know war's coming. I mean, many people are now realising that, we've got to get ready. And, it's the job of our government. Our first role of our government is to look after our security. They need to be making changes, and they should have been doing it by now, rather than waffling on about we've got great kit and we don't need more people. That's absolute rubbish. The Chief of the General Staff was spot on. Saying that we need to be ready and prepared is exactly what we should be doing.
Steve, the RAF, for example, last year, they had to apologise for reverse discrimination by excluding white pilots from a recruitment scheme. On what planet now are they expected to... I'm talking about white people, white pilots. They've been subject to all this diversity and inclusion and equality nonsense that's ravaged the armed forces. How would you expect people who've been excluded under those circumstances to then go and take arms and defend the country?
Look, we've got this classic example of we've got a recruitment problem in the armed forces. Why have we got a recruitment problem in the armed forces? Because they outsourced recruiting. The days when you used to go to a recruiting office and meet people from the armed forces and invite you to come and join the Army, Navy or Air Force, and particularly in my case, come and join the Royal Navy, have gone. They've outsourced it. That's the biggest problem we've got at the moment. It's not wokeism. It's the fact that we're not actually doing the proper recruiting ourselves. I mean, somebody has to seriously ask the question, how can it possibly take so long to get so many people who want to volunteer to get into the armed forces actually get into the armed forces?
Yeah, Steve, sorry to cut in there. I just want to give a last word to Phil because we've got to wrap things up. Phil?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, go on.
Well, your take on that, the recruitment process, what's going on? Why aren't young people signing up?
I think that there's a problem throughout. I call it the 3 R's: recruitment, retention and resettlement. And if you get one of those 3 R's wrong, you've got a massive problem. Now, at the moment, they're struggling to retain people, which means when that soldier gets out, he's got a poor taste in his mouth. He passes that on. That word gets back to the person that's going to join up. And that's why numbers have gone down. And obviously, as my friend over there alluded to, the outsourcing of all this to private firms who are only interested in their own numbers, it doesn't work for me at all.
OK, great stuff. Phil Campion and former Navy officer Dr. Steve Aiken, thanks for your expertise. Appreciate it. Let's get the news headlines with Tatiana.
Ben, thank you very much and good afternoon. It's 2:33. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of being bullied by his own MPs as today's Prime Minister's questions were dominated by allegations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke warned of an electoral massacre for the government. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, the Tories need a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticisms, accusing Labour of not understanding British values. But Sir Keir seized on the editorial, saying that Tory infighting had descended into a long-running soap opera.
We've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Some rail services have now resumed after trains were suspended last night due to Storm Jocelyn. These are live pictures from the Shetland Islands, where conditions are still quite blustery. The storm's left thousands without power in Scotland. And at least one person is missing in South Wales after going into the sea in Port Call last night. This is the 10th named storm of the season, hitting much of Britain just 2 days after Storm Isha claimed 2 lives. And Donald Trump swept to victory in the New Hampshire primary overnight, leaving his challenger, Nikki Haley, with few paths to the White House. But the former president is also in for an uphill battle. Despite his support among the GOP's hard right, he's still facing 91 criminal charges. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 2:40. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Good debate, I thought, on the conscription just then.
Yeah, it's
With Phil
there's
Campion.
2 separate conversations, isn't there? There's the invasion of the UK, or would you go to, say, Eastern Europe to defend Poland or a NATO country if Russia invaded?
2 rather different prospects. But there you go. Keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com.
I do wonder, you know, all these Gen Zers or Gen Zers, would they probably be protesting in favour of our enemy, as they do with sort of the Houthis or, you know,
You're suggesting
Hamas?
they're not as patriotic as us.
Yeah, imagine us on the front line in Donbass. You'd probably have all the wokies from those London universities protesting that we were being too harsh on Russia.
Yeah, probably. Hopefully not the majority, though. Anyway, let's reintroduce our panel. Political commentator Patrick O'Flynn and the former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn, Matt Zarb-Cousin. Thank you very much for joining us again. Now, we want to kick off with a bit of Trump. Of course, he had another win, Patrick, in New Hampshire. Is he sure? Is it certain that he is now going to be the nominee?
Well, I think it's all but certain, but the result, I think, still leaves his opponent, Nikki Haley, who's still in the race, as, you know, just about viable. It wasn't such a landslide that she had no option but to fold straight away. But she just seems to me a bit too goody two-shoes, a bit too conventional for the current sort of atmospherics of American politics. So I'd be surprised if she sticks...
But Patrick, wasn't it a lot closer than expected because it was an open vote? You had Democrats... I was watching US news last night, and you had Democrats being interviewed saying, yeah, I'm going to vote Democrat in the general election, but I came down here today to vote for Nikki Haley because I hate Trump.
I think there was a bit of that, but on the other hand, at some point, the Republican Party presumably wants to ensure it wins the presidency back. And I do think Nikki Haley, the polling research shows, does poll better with non-aligned voters than Donald Trump does. Donald Trump, I think, is going to win the nomination and may well win the presidency because he can turn out the sort of American hinterland. But nonetheless, you know, there is an argument to be made for keeping Haley in the race and testing him for another few weeks.
Is it all a bit depressing that we're probably going to see a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
I think it's depressing for the Democrats because I think the problem that they've got is a lot of what's happening at the moment is splitting their vote. So the Democrat vote is divided on the Middle East. The American public is slowly getting to a point where it's not in favour now of arming Ukraine. Trump has I'd say, more introspective foreign policy. That might appeal to them. And I think that Trump is, you know, in a campaign is going to be far more dynamic than Joe Biden. I think that the Democrats are, you know, they're probably going to lose if it's Trump, and I can see it being Trump.
What would your old boss, Jeremy Corbyn, have made of Trump? Say Corbyn won in 2019 and Trump, of course, won in 2020. How would they have interacted? Did Corbyn ever speak to you about Trump? Any off-the-mark comments, off-the-cuff comments?
Yeah, I think when Trump announced the Muslim ban, he said that he would invite him to a mosque in Finsbury Park. But look, you know, when Trump won in 2016, I think the entire kind of Corbyn leader's office were recognising that something different was happening.
Were they galvanised by that? Did they have hope that maybe something could happen over here, albeit on different end of the...
It was a rejection of the status quo. Hillary Clinton was a continuity candidate in terms of the economic model. clearly the economic model wasn't working for most people, and Trump was offering an alternative. So, you know, obviously we wanted Bernie Sanders to win the nomination and again in 2020 because he was offering something different. And I think that if he had won that nomination and won the presidency, then we wouldn't be in this position now where, you know, it looks like Trump might come back and win.
Well, Bernie was turned over by the DNC, wasn't he? He wasn't allowed to win the nomination when he probably would have. Patrick, what would a Trump presidency mean for Britain?
Well, on the one hand, he seems to genuinely like this country, whereas Biden pretends he has no English roots and is kind of pure Irish.
Doesn't that get you a bit miffed, Biden's continual comments about Britain?
So Biden is quite snidey. Biden won't do a trade deal with us. Donald Trump seems to like us. On the other hand, foreign policy-wise, Donald Trump is quite a risky bet for us because he might pull the plug on NATO. It's not beyond the bounds with Donald Trump. He will certainly
I don't think he would
pull the plug on Zelensky and do a peace deal with Putin that leaves Putin with some Ukrainian sovereign territory in his grasp, which I personally think would be appalling.
I think Trump's issue with NATO was he wanted Germany in particular to pay up and meet their expectations, and it came at a time when Germany was importing all this gas from Russia, all this natural gas. So you're relying on Russia for your gas and you're underfunding NATO. Yes. I think Trump deserves more credit. He was the no-war president.
He did foresee that, the reliance.
Exactly. There's that famous meme going around where Trump sat around the table with world leaders. He's speaking to Germany directly and saying, you guys need to pay up. You're getting all this natural gas from Russia and you're underfunding NATO, which is meant to defend against Russia.
No, absolutely. But I think there is a scale of unpredictability around Trump that conventional experts in foreign policy and geopolitics would find very nerve-wracking. It may be, like there used to be a phrase in geopolitics about club mad, and that referred to certain Middle East dictators. But if club mad involves the leader of the most powerful nation in the world, there might be a case for saying every other leader is a bit mad, thinks I'll behave myself for a few years.
And Patrick, sorry to bombard you with questions, but there was a story recently about Nigel Farage potentially being the ambassador to the US if Trump won re-election. Trump, of course, called out Farage at a recent, was it at the caucus? He said, where's Nigel Farage? Stand up, handsome guy. Could Nigel ever become a diplomat for Britain?
Well, look, it was said when Trump won his first term, wasn't it, that there was a little movement for a few days that Nigel should be the ambassador because Nigel was the first British politician in to see him, and people in the Foreign Office were having absolute kittens about that. That was never serious. It's not beyond the bounds possibility.
It's not going to happen, is it?
I think Nigel would love that.
Yeah,
it's not probable. I would love to see it because of the sort of pompous people in the Foreign Office would hate it.
You just want to annoy them.
Yeah.
Matt, what would what would a relationship look like between a Prime Minister Keir Starmer and a President Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think you can look back at the 2020 leadership contest where Starmer was asked, I think, who is he backing for the nomination, and he basically said anyone but Trump, anyone but Trump.
Oh, really?
Presidency.
He said that.
Yeah, that's. So your researchers can dig that clip.
Trump won't forget that kind of comment, by the way.
Why would he say that?
No, I know. I mean, Rebecca Long-Bailey said obviously we back Bernie Sanders, and so it'd be interesting when there's that if there is that dichotomy.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump, does he have a long memory?
I think I think he's infamous, isn't he, Patrick, for remembering who's been loyal to him, who said what over the years. He's no fool on that front.
In that rally the other week, he said, "Here's Nigel. He's been with us from the start."
Yeah,
I think that counts with him. Yeah,
he remembers.
He's big on loyalty.
Shall we move on to domestic matters? And this is the Royal Mail Service, and it may be that we see it reduced quite a bit. Ofcom are looking at various options in order to reduce their massive deficit. They're losing hundreds of millions of pounds last year. And these are some of the recommendations, that it could go down to a 5-day per week or even a 3-day per week in terms of deliveries. So, Patrick, is this necessary? We are subsidising the Post Office, the Royal Mail.
Yeah, it seems a bit odd, doesn't it, in the age of, amazing technology, that you have a core service that gets worse, not better. But then you think so much of our communication is now switched to other high-tech methods, and you also, the profitable sort of parcel delivery stuff, clearly there are big private companies involved in that. Post Office isn't going to get back a monopoly on that. the sums have to add up. I see Rishi Sunak is saying, I will never countenance not having a Saturday delivery. I don't think he'll be around for long enough to make a difference. And I think if we can get to a stable new arrangement, which might even be 3 days a week of really reliable delivery, that people probably would wear that.
Well, I mean, anything that involved redundancies of postal workers would, of course, be battled by the unions.
Yeah, and I think the public would tend to be quite sympathetic, and that, you know, sometimes the postal unions...
Particularly after all of the scandal.
Yeah, the postal unions have got that air of passport to Pimlico, and a bit like the RMT leadership, that they're kind of quite smart-talking Cockney geezers, but I think there's quite a big public fan club for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Matt, do we need to bring the Royal Mail back into national ownership?
Yeah, I think we have to have a discussion about, you know, what is the postal service for? And I think it is a public service. Not everything has to be run for profit. Some things support the wider economy. And I think the postal service being available and being active most days of the week is quite important to that, I think, at this point in time. That might change in future.
We have so many other options, though, don't we? Yes, I know people do rely on the Royal Mail, but there are many other competitors for people to choose from. Some cheaper.
There are, but I think the market hasn't made things better, in my view. I think that the postal service should never have been privatised in the first place. The fact that we're now subsidising a private company, a private enterprise, is clearly not where
50 million a year we give them, and that's until 2025, and that's been in place since 2012. And in 2012, we gave them 210 million.
It does seem to be like the railways, sort of the worst of both worlds, doesn't it? It's not it's not nationalised, it's not completely privatised. So it's a lot of our money being wasted.
That's probably some of the few policies I would have agreed with Jeremy Corbyn, renationalising the railways, renationalising the water companies.
Some things just, you know, the market doesn't deliver those particular things. And I think you have to look at what the market can and can't deliver. And look, I just think
I think the market could deliver for postal services.
Maybe not the type of service that our economy requires, you know, practically every day. I mean, that's the question.
I mean, we have Uber, we have food deliveries overnight. You can get same-day deliveries in 20 minutes from Amazon.
There would be a risk that the market wouldn't take on that universal delivery obligation for every far-flung. Whereas the Royal Mail has to do those loss-making activities. That's part of the deal.
Yeah, it has to go out to the House
Patrick, by the way, shareholders, investors in Royal Mail, enjoyed a £400 million dividend in 2021. Last year, they recorded a £319 million loss. On one hand, they're saying they're skint, yet on the other, they're plying their shareholders with millions and millions of pounds. That's outrageous, isn't it?
Well, I'd have to see the full context for the return on investment, but we shouldn't ever forget, when you have these dividend row stories, that a lot of people's pension funds that they pay into depend on returns on investments in the stock market. So that money won't just go to a few people in manor houses in the Cotswolds. So there'll be hundreds of thousands of people whose pensions are in...
Matt, you know, like you've got something to say on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, look, the value of your investments may go up as well as down. I mean, that's the nature of it. If something is... I think we do have this worst of both worlds situation where we outsource a lot of what I think the public sector should do, and a lot of that money ends up in the pockets of shareholders when these are not even profit-making companies.
Well, should we move on? Because we were talking about the special relationship with the States, and it seems there's been a bit of a tongue-in-cheek diplomatic row.
Bit of a ding-dong.
A bit of a ding-dong over how to make a cup of tea and how not to make a cup of tea, crucially. Now, I think we can get up this press release on the screen for you. United States Embassy press release, January the 24th, 2024, so today. Today's media reports of an American professor's recipe for the perfect cup of tea has landed our special bond with the United Kingdom in hot water. Tea is the elixir of camaraderie, a sacred bond that unites our nation. We cannot stand idly by as such an outrageous proposal threatens the very foundation of our special relationship. Therefore, we want to ensure the good people of the United Kingdom that the unthinkable notion of adding salt to Britain's national drink is not official United States policy and never will be. He goes on to say the US Embassy will continue to make tea in the proper way by microwaving it. So there you go. A little joke at the end of that. But this is what social media has given us, isn't it? These silly press statements, and then we have a back and forth between embassies and countries on social media.
Yeah, I think the United States Embassy in London has a bit of a reputation for trying to find a bit of levity and camaraderie in this way. As a determined tea and not coffee drinker myself, the idea of salt in tea, and I don't know if this was a sort of semi-serious suggestion
I think it was.
by an academic. I'm not even going to experiment with that.
Matt, we can't trust the Americans for food, or any food or drink, can we?
Not really. I mean, I think, don't they have spray on cheese? I mean, that sort of says it all, really, doesn't it?
Right, well,
does say it all,
on that
yes.
bombshell, we'll wrap it up there. Patrick O'Flynn and Matt Zarb-Cousin, thank you so much. And thank you, the viewers, for joining Emily and I today. We've appreciated all your emails, nice ones and the nasty ones too.
Yes, Tom Harwood will be back tomorrow, but thank you very much for standing in for Tom all this week so far. We'll be back tomorrow.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office with me, Annie Shuttleworth. It'll be a dry evening for many areas, but rain will arrive from the south and west overnight, and it will be another mild night. That's as a warm front is approaching through the rest of the day into the south and west. Ahead of that, though, we do have a ridge of higher pressure, so that will settle things down. So the winds should ease through the evening, and any showers we've seen across many parts of Scotland will tend to fade away. So a dry night for a dry evening for many, but rain does arrive through the night from the southwest across parts of Wales, Devon and Cornwall and into Northern Ireland, where the rain could be quite persistent. Ahead of that, we will see some mist and fog developing, low cloud on the hills, and it will be a chilly start across the north and east, but a very different story in the south and west, much milder. And that milder, gloomier feel will become more widespread through Thursday. So it's going to be a much cloudier day than today, with persistent rain, particularly across Scotland, bringing some hill snow, but also across Wales, parts of Cumbria, southwest Scotland too, and into the southwest through the day. The rain will be fairly persistent. In the southeast, though, it should stay dry, and it will be another mild day tomorrow. And then on Friday morning, we see quite a blustery band of rain push eastwards across the country. That should clear through the first few hours to leave many with a dry and fine day, but it will feel a little bit fresher than recently, but plenty of sunshine on the cards for Friday. A little bit cloudier, but generally quite dry for the weekend. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. In a few minutes, I'll talk to our political editor Christopher Hope and the Conservative MP for South Derbyshire who's just joined me in the studio, Heather Wheeler. I'll be asking her about Rishi Sunak, of course. Other Tories have rallied around the Prime Minister after a former cabinet member called for him to go. And there's more graphic details from the trial of Valdo Calicani, the man who killed 3 people in my home city of Nottingham last year. Donald Trump had another good night, but I'll tell you why a legend of British music isn't happy with the former US president. Heaven knows they're miserable now. And there's the story that seems to have got everyone talking. The head of the British Army has warned that the government may need to introduce conscription. But the big question is, would you fight for your country when many people don't even feel like your country is fighting for you? That's all coming in your next hour. And also later in the show, I'll bring you an interview with that man, Lee Anderson. He's made some very interesting comments today. Bit of a U-turn. Nigel Farage has said, what is Lee Anderson playing at? Well, I'll ask him in an hour's time. You won't want to miss that. But first, email me your views. Get involved all the usual way. Is it curtains for Sunak? It's the last thing the Conservatives need, another leadership challenge this close to a general election? Or is it time to pull the ripcord and try somebody new? Let me know who you'd vote for. gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, here's your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer accused the Prime Minister of being bullied by his own MPs as today's Prime Minister's questions were dominated by allegations of Tory infighting. It's after Sir Simon Clarke warned of an electoral massacre for the government. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, the Tories need a change of leader. The Prime Minister rebuffed the criticisms, accusing Labour of not understanding Britain's values. But Sir Keir seized on the editorial, saying that Tory infighting had descended into a long-running soap opera.
We've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizb ut-Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Rain has said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Donald Trump swept a victory in the New Hampshire primary overnight, demonstrating his tight grip over the Republican Party's hard right. The former president took 55% of the vote, beating his last remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, while President Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. Ms Haley, who is a former ambassador for the United Nations, is vowing to fight on, promising to stay in the race until Super Tuesday on the 5th of March, when 15 states and 1 territory hold their votes. The government says it's committed to postal deliveries 6 days a week, despite a report by Ofcom suggesting some days could be cut to save costs. Number 10 says the government will engage with the options outlined by the regulator, but insists deliveries on Saturdays will remain. Ofcom says it's vital the postal service is modernised to meet the evolving needs of consumers. Other options include slowing down deliveries, with most letters taking 3 or more days to arrive. But Communication Workers Union General Secretary Dave Ward says the changes risk destroying Royal Mail.
It's thousands and thousands of job losses, of course, but more importantly, in some ways, it's the end of a great British institution, a public service that's still important to the public and to businesses. If Royal Mail have got a leadership that don't want to deliver the USO, well, then they're in the wrong business. And our view is that we could easily find ways of growing Royal Mail. If you let them get on with a job, they will come up with different ways.
Britain's councils are set to receive £500 million in an emergency bailout to avert a cash crisis. It comes after MPs called for a funding boost for struggling councils on the brink of bankruptcy. The money will initially be used for children's and adult social care over the next 18 months. However, reports suggest many councils believe the funding will only prevent a financial crisis in the short term. A Russian military transport plane has crashed near the Ukrainian border. Reports say it was carrying Ukrainian